What do I think about wanting to get a more native sounding accent? And it's actually not quite so easy for us as teachers. On the one hand, we don't want anyone to feel embarrassed or ashamed or to be discriminated against just because of their accent. On the other hand, we care about clear and effective communication, and that should be the goal for any language learner. We should be able to speak to people clearly, and they should be able to understand us easily and to have a two-way conversation with us. That's the ideal and the goal. And that is definitely achievable even without sounding like a native. But at the same time, sounding like a native can be advantageous in a lot of ways. But when I talk about accents being advantageous, it's actually more than just sounding like a native. It could even be to sound like a local, even if you don't actually sound like a native. Let me give you an example. Singapore is a country where English is one of the official languages. And so almost everybody in Singapore who's gone through the Singaporean education system can speak English on a first language level, but they do have a very unique type of English. They have their own slang terms, they have their own vernacular, they have their own unique accent. There are even things that would traditionally be wrong grammatically, but they're used so commonly in Singapore that it's become an accepted way of communicating in what's called Singaporean English. It's also more affectionately called Singlish. Now, take for example a person who's, say, from the United States, they move to Singapore. They're going to have a clearly American accent, and that's going to work to their advantage because they're going to sound more similar to all of our favorite Hollywood heroes and TV stars. But at the same time, they're not going to sound like the locals. So when somebody from the United States actually changes their accent, and when they start speaking Singlish, they can actually build rapport in a way that they wouldn't be able to do otherwise. See, we as humans naturally tend to feel more comfortable with others who are similar to us. And that's actually one of the reasons why it's so cool to learn multiple languages. I could be in a room with somebody else here in Japan who might speak English, and we could communicate in English. But the moment I start speaking Japanese, the connection that we have changes instantly. All these walls drop, they become more relaxed and more comfortable, and we're now able to build rapport in a way that we just wouldn't be able to do otherwise. This idea of connecting with another person in their language can also be extended to encompass connecting with the other person in their language in the way that they use it. And I've experienced that as well. I mean, I normally speak English like this, but if I was to be, let's say, in Malaysia or Singapore, and if I was to use the local vernacular, I would actually break the ice and build rapport with somebody that I'm meeting for the first time much quicker than I would just speaking normally. Now, there's also another benefit to sounding like a local, and if you're a tourist, this is especially going to be important to you. You're less likely to be taken advantage of. Now, drawing on what we just talked about, it's clear that if you don't sound like a native or you don't sound like a local, you can be mistreated or discriminated against. Basically, when people think, oh, this person's not a local, I can try and take advantage of them, that's a form of discrimination. This does exist. Not only do people try to take advantage of you, they might even be less willing to work with you, less willing to give you certain opportunities. And for English learners, they actually are constantly fed this by the ESL industry that they need to sound like a native. I mean, that is the ultimate goal. If you don't sound like a native, then you're not going to get any jobs and you're going to not have any opportunities at all when you go to this new country. You're going to end up homeless and on the street. I mean, that's not necessarily the word for word narrative that they're fed, but sometimes, I mean, with some of the marketing stuff that you see, that is kind of implied. Add to that in a lot of non-English speaking countries, if you sound more native, then you are actually respected more. That's also lent to other problems such as teachers who are not actually qualified to be teaching the language, who have terrible grammar, who have terrible word choice, they don't communicate correctly or naturally, but the one thing that they are able to do is sound like they have a native accent. I mean, for anyone who's actually familiar with those native accents, or who's familiar with the way that native English speakers speak, would be able to see right through it and tell that it's a fake accent. But for a lot of their target consumers or their target customers, the learners of English that they're trying to sell their courses and programs to, they're not really able to distinguish or discern the difference. And so they end up basically spending their hard-earned money with a teacher, and they think that just because they've got that fake accent that they're actually a better teacher. The bottom line is this: if a person speaking a language, any language, is able to communicate clearly, effortlessly, and easily with another person, accents don't actually matter. It doesn't stop or hinder the communication in any way whatsoever. In such a situation, if that person is discriminated against, that is morally wrong. And in no way should we be, as teachers especially, be encouraging that behavior. And so as somebody who's actually teaching accents and pronunciation, and at the same time is fundamentally opposed to discrimination on the basis of accents, how do I reconcile those two? I'll be honest and say it's actually not that easy. There are no shortage of people who would use that as ammunition to basically shoot me down. But what those people think is of very little importance to me. I care a lot more about my students and whether or not I'm making a difference in their lives and whether or not I'm helping them. And I know for a fact that they are going to have advantages. They had a better accent or pronunciation, or clearer accent, I should say. Whenever I begin any of my accent training programs with any student, the first thing that I always talk about with them is I try and make it clear to them that, look, if you don't have a native sounding accent, that's okay. In fact, I posted a video about that just recently, where I'm talking about a stand-up comedian named Vir Das, who's from India. He has an Indian accent, but he has no problems whatsoever being a world-class entertainer. So my advice to you as a learner would be this: if you want to be the best communicator you can possibly be, then work on that. That should be your number one goal and priority. If in addition to that you also want to get a particular accent, don't let anybody stop you and tell you you shouldn't do it. If you're a teacher and you want to help your students sound more like a native, you should continue doing that. But if you are doing that, I would encourage you to try your best. I mean, it is a lot easier said than done. To definitely instill in your students the values and attitudes to not discriminate and to not tolerate any form of discrimination on the basis of accents. I do think it is possible to take that stance. I think it is possible to accept and acknowledge that having a certain accent does offer a lot of advantages, and at the same time not advocate that anybody who doesn't sound native is discriminated against. If I could offer an analogy to kind of illustrate what I mean with this is probably not the best analogy, but it's the best one I can think of. I mean, think about the practice of wearing a suit to interviews. The way that a person is dressed has objectively no influence whatsoever on how capable they are or how competent they are with performing their duty or their jobs. But there's absolutely no debate whatsoever about whether it's a good idea to wear a suit to an interview. I would think of accents in a very similar way. Your accent may have no effect whatsoever on your ability to communicate in the language, but it's definitely something that can affect how you are perceived, the first impression that you make, and how a person feels, how comfortable a person feels interacting with you. And the advantages that come with having that accent is similar to wearing a suit, even though how you're dressed actually has nothing to do with your character, nothing to do with your competence, and so on. And so if anyone asks me whether it's important to have a native accent, I'd say no, it's not important to have a native accent, but the way you sound, the way you speak, whether that is native or whether that is similar to the locals, wherever it is you're going, does come with its advantages. There's no doubt about that. And if you want to have those advantages, then it might be worth investing in getting a certain accent. If those advantages aren't that important to you, if you don't really care, then you don't need to worry about your accent. Do your thing and be happy. Teachers, learners, what do you guys think? I would love to know your thoughts. Let me know in the comments below.